priority of charges. Now, this is why the question of priority will come up. Sometimes you can create more than one charge on the same asset. So the company's motor vehicles have on them a fixed charge and a floating charge. On the company's motor vehicle, we could have two fixed charges created during different times. On the company's buildings, we could have two floating charges created during different times. So in that case where we have more than one type of charge or a specific type of charge, two or more of them, the question of which one has priority over the other in the event they are claiming for settlement comes up. Which of these will be satisfied first? Now, these rules guide us in determining this priority, where the first rule is that all fixed charges rank prior to floating charges. And we must add generally, this is a general rule, that all fixed charges will rank prior to floating charges. This is irrespective of the date of creation. That if we have a floating charge that was created on the 1st of January this year, and we have a fixed charge that was created in June this year, that fixed charge is going to have priority over the floating charge, just as a result of its nature that it is fixed. Having been created after the floating charge, if the two are to be satisfied at once and the question of priority comes up, then we are saying all fixed charges, irrespective of when they were created, they will have priority over all floating charges, and this is generally. It's a general rule. We may have some exception that we may want to note sometimes later. Then what about fixed charges by themselves? Then we are saying fixed charges rank in the order, they rank in the order of creation. Fixed charges rank in the order of creation, where we are saying the first to be created will have priority. The first to be created will have priority. So if we were to create a fixed charge, two of them, one is created on the 1st of January and another fixed charge is created on the 1st of February, then the fixed charge created on the 1st of January is going to have priority over the charge created on the 1st of February simply because of the order of creation, where we are saying in respect of two fixed charges, the first to be created is to rank prior to the subsequently created fixed charges. What about floating charges? Something similar, where we are saying floating charges, these are charges, floating charges rank in the order, floating charges rank in the order of creation. They rank in the order of creation, where we are saying again, the first floating charge to be created will have priority. The first floating charge to be created will have priority over subsequently created floating charges. So a floating charge created on the 1st of January and another floating charge created on the 2nd of January, the floating charge of 1st of January will rank prior to the floating charge of 1st of February simply because of the order of their creation. Then we have a fourth rule in relation to priority of charges, where we are saying that a floating charge may rank prior to a fixed charge if it has a negative pledge clause. If it has a negative pledge clause, then it is good we know what this negative pledge clause is. A negative pledge clause, is a provision in a floating charge, stating its priority over all charges subsequently created, whether fixed or floating, That is a negative pledge clause. A provision in a floating charge stating that it has priority over all charges subsequently created, meaning created after it, whether they are fixed or they are floating. So this fourth rule, this should be number 4, this fourth rule on the priority of a floating charge, it is a floating charge having priority over fixed charges that are created after the floating charge. Ordinarily, all floating charges, irrespective of when they were created, they would have priority over the floating charge. But it is not the sort of floating charge that has a negative pledge clause. When a floating charge has a negative pledge clause, it is simply saying, I am a floating charge that has been created on the 1st of June. I am going to have priority over all charges that are created after the 1st of June, whether those charges be fixed, whether those charges be floating. So the negative pledge clause gives us an exceptional case where we have a floating charge that has priority over fixed charges. That's why we indicated that this would be a general rule. We do have circumstances where a floating charge can rank prior to a fixed charge, and that is only when the floating charge has this provision we are referring to as the negative pledge clause. That clause gives the floating charge priority over the fixed charge. Let us now look at crystallization. Crystallization of floating charges. Crystallization of floating charges. When a charge crystallizes, it lays a specific claim on a specific asset. When we have a floating charge crystallizing, it converts to become a specific charge where it is specifically claiming, where it is laying claim on a specific asset of the company. So crystallization will be happening as a result of specific events occurring, specific events suggesting the default on the part of the charger on the terms of the charge created on of the nature of a floating charge. If any of these events happen, it is a suggestion on the chargee that they may not be paid. Their terms may not be satisfied. So as a result of breach, which is suggested by any of these crystallizing events, then the floating charge is laying a claim on a specific asset. It is doing what we would describe as hardening. It was previously floating. It is now hardening on a specific asset. It is now claiming on a specific asset. It is now converting to become a fixed charge. So you could describe crystallization as the laying of a claim by a floating charge on a specific asset of the company or the charger. This is the company, that is the borrowing company. It is the converting, it is the converting of a floating charge, the converting of a floating charge to a fixed charge. Now the question is, why is this crystallization happening? Why is a floating charge converting to become a fixed charge? Why is a floating charge hardening? We can now discuss the events causing crystallization of charges. Events causing crystallization of floating charges. Events causing the crystallization of floating charges. So there are a number of events that will result into a floating charge hardening, a floating charge converting into a fixed charge. So these events include the following: a winding up petition, against the company. So if any petitioner were to present a winding up petition, a petition to court requiring the court to give a winding up order of this company, then that petition would result into the floating charge, any floating charge of this company to crystallize. The other event would be the appointment of a receiver, against the company, So as a consequence of any creditor trying to enforce their debt, if they proceed on to appoint a receiver in respect of this company, then such appointment of a receiver would be causing the crystallization of all floating charges issued by this company or created by this company. The other event would be cessation of business by the company. Cessation of business by the company. If this company ceases to do business, if this company goes into dormancy, then such going into dormancy will be an event that is eventually going to cause the crystallization of floating charges, where floating charges are going to convert to become fixed charges. The other possibility would be the crystallization of another floating charge. If it causes the company to cease business. The crystallization of another floating charge, if it causes the company to cease business. The crystallization of another floating charge, if it causes the company to cease business. Now, for any other reason that another floating charge may crystallize, and crystallizes in the sense that it has claimed a very critical, a very important asset of the company, such that this company is now no longer able to continue with business, that this company now goes into dormancy, then such crystallization of that other floating charge will also be causing the crystallization of all other floating charges alike. There will also be a crystallization in the event of a breach or a violation of the terms of the charge. So this could be the result of maybe the non-payment of interest to the chargee or to the lender, which results into the lender claiming on the specific on a specific asset of this company, that the floating charge has